Hey, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the Trend Report. I'm glad you're here for what I know is going to be a really fun and informative conversation with my special guest today, Sarabeth Berk. Hey, Sarabeth, how are you?
I said, I'm so glad to be here with you today.
So, do I call you doctor?
You can call me Sarah Beth.
Okay, you sure? Because I
Yeah,
mean, you've got a PhD, and that's something really, really important that I know you worked hard for. So, congratulations to you for that.
I did work hard for it, so thank you.
So, Sarah Beth, tell our listeners a little about who you are and what you do.
Well, I'm a Colorado girl. I was born in the mountains, raised in the mountains, and I have always been really artistic and creative and academic. And I never knew how all those parts fit together. Didn't think I could make money as an artist, but I ended up in the classroom teaching. And I loved that, except I felt really stifled at a certain point. I really wanted to, transform education and do things to make learning more interesting, but I had this title as a teacher. And to break out of that box was something I didn't know how to do. I wanted to expand my career. So that's when I went back to grad school to get the credentials, quote unquote. But really, I mean, my background has been about a journey of finding myself and who am I in my career as a professional, which is why I wrote this book, because I think professional identity is a topic no one talked to me about. Everyone said, let's talk about your passion and your purpose, but no one ever asked me, who am I? So I think my background, in essence, has been a process of searching for what do I do in the world, but what do I call myself when I do it? And now that's what I help people figure out is really what is their truest professional identity.
So, I think this is fascinating, which is why I'm so excited about this conversation because I don't know a lot about this and I'm excited to learn. But listening to what you just said, when I hear the term professional identity, so many of us that grew up in the before the 2000s, right? We'll
Yeah.
just say it that way. Our professional identity was our job title.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like I was in sales. So I was a salesperson. That was my identity. I mean, and I don't do anything really relative to that. But
Mhm.
the title of your book is More Than My Title. So explain it. I know this all journey started for you when you were kind of having a little bit of a professional identity crisis. So share that
Yeah.
insight with us.
Yeah, I mean, who is really their job title anymore? Job titles are becoming this old, inane thing that traps everyone in a box, and yet people are more than their job titles. So, gosh, I mean, when I graduated from college, I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't have a job lined up. And what's interesting, that space, when you graduate from college, you lose your student identity. So I'd known that identity for 22 years of my life. And suddenly I was like, shoot, who am I now? I don't
Mhm.
even know what to call myself. So I think that's when I started realizing job titles become the supplement for our professional identity. So you need a job in order to kind of define yourself. And that's messed up because at some point you realize a job doesn't define who you are.
Right.
So I think definitely in this day and age, people have side jobs, second careers, these non-linear career paths, and they accumulate a lot of different roles, skills, and job titles, which is really interesting because as humans, we like to grow and be challenged, but it makes it confusing because if you started in sales, but then you pivot and you go into computer coding, but then you go from tech to higher ed, and then from higher ed into art, people are like, what the heck do you do? How does all that fit together?
Mhm.
So I think I was having a identity crisis every time I changed a career field. I went from being in teaching in the classroom to being in higher ed to leading entrepreneurship, and now I'm this expert and authority on hybrid professional identity, and it's been really interesting to make sense of that. So this notion of job titles, I think, is really more about who do you want to be? What do you want to call yourself? You get to decide and define your own professional identity for yourself. When I had that aha, that was a major shift because no one had told me that was possible. So it's an internal discovery and description as opposed to external of what do you do?
So, as a coach, who spends a lot of time working with people on internal things. I love that, right? And I love the question, who do you want to be?
Hmm.
And don't add to it, who do you want to be when you grow up? Because I don't know that we
Right.
ever actually grow up, right? But who do you want to be?
Yeah.
And that can be a really, really hard question for people to answer because it requires you to look inside. It
Yes.
requires you to do the work to really ask yourself those tough questions and to get to a place that you can answer them. And it's not easy.
No, it's not easy. And who, just the who, is something people haven't really sat with.
Mhm.
And I think career coaches often focus on the what, like talk about your skills, talk about your personality assessment, all of these characteristics. And then identity is the thing we just honestly don't talk about.
Mm-mm. No, not at all. So, what is a hybrid professional?
Yeah. So, in essence, first of all, there's a framework of professional identity. I think it's important to share that. And then I'll define what a hybrid professional is. So I think singularity, multiplicity, and hybridity are three types of professionals we have in the workforce.
All right. Sorry.
So,
Say
yeah,
those again.
I will. Singularity, multiplicity, and hybridity. That's my framework. So singularity means one, right? One professional identity. So if you fall into that type of worker, you tend to be an expert in something because you only have this one focus. Multiplicity is many. These are people that wear a lot of hats. They tend to be called generalists. They do a lot of things. We also have a lot of terms like I'm multi-talented or multi-passionate. I'm a polymath. Those are people that fall into the space of multiplicity. And then the third category is hybridity. And hybridity, the best way I think of it is a Venn diagram where you have circles that intersect. And a hybrid professional is a worker who has many professional identities, but works at the intersection of those identities and they integrate identities, which is why they defy all these job titles and names. So people that have multiple identities are using them one at a time. Those identities probably don't even connect with each other, they're all separated. Whereas a hybrid is the culmination and interconnected combination of many identities at the same time.
Okay. This is fascinating. So, the singularity, an
Yeah,
expert. So, an example of that would be like a physician,
yeah, totally.
someone that is in medicine. Maybe I'm a eye doctor.
Yeah,
They're an expert in that. And there are a lot of experts in a variety of different fields. You could be a social
totally.
media expert. It, excuse me. You could be a social media expert. And that really kind of defines you in this singular thing, the one thing that you do.
Yeah,
Now, multiplicity, did I say that right?
yeah.
Multiplicity. I could not spell it, by the way. I make fun of myself, guys. You know that it's okay. So, this is kind of a generalist, but we do multiple things. What's an
Mhm.
example of someone that, do you have an example of something like that?
Well, yeah. And first of all, I just want to also say identity is a social construct. And I explain that because you are an expert if you think you are, right? You are a generalist if you think you are, and you are a hybrid if you think you are. And not everybody is everything.
Hmm.
So I just want to say that, like, just because you and I think a physician is an expert, they
Right.
might think of themselves a generalist because they do their eye doctor thing plus run a business plus, plus, plus. Okay.
Sure. That makes sense.
So a person in multiplicity could be an expert in many things, but does them one at a time. So they're by day, I'm an eye doctor. By night, I play the guitar and perform at, on stage. Multiplicity could just be like I mentor, I'm on a board, I have a marketing business, I like to run events. Like it's a person who has multiple professional identities, but those identities never meet. They're always separated.
So
And it
they're
could
always in
be,
their own lane and they
yeah,
never cross over.
yeah,
So, okay, that makes a lot of sense. Now, then the hybrid one, they cross over and they
yes,
intersect. And then that Venn diagram, which I drew it as you were saying it, by the way.
yeah.
So that Venn diagram is where they thrive, is where all of those meet.
Yeah, there comes a place when I interview people who are hybrid professionals, and most people don't even realize they are. Um, there comes a place where a hybrid is like, like in my case, I love being an artist and I love being an educator and being a researcher. And I knew I needed work that allowed all three of those to show up at the same time. When I was finding jobs that made me just be a teacher, or I could only be the researcher, I felt like parts of myself were being lost or dismissed.
Mhm.
So a hybrid has to show up in their multiple intersectional space. Otherwise, they literally feel disengaged and they're not their fullest version.
Mhm. So this is really, really interesting because I think that so many people struggle to really understand what makes them happy and what
Mhm.
makes them thrive. And what you're describing is if you can get to this place of where you're a hybrid professional and you can bring the things that you love, the things that make you thrive into the same place, then you have the ability to create the success that you really, really want out of your life and out of your career.
Oh my gosh, I love how you said that. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. So much career advice is about choose one thing. If you have multiple interests, you still have to pick a path. And I think that's old advice. I think if you have multiple interests or multiple areas of expertise, integrate them, become the sum of those parts. And when you can tell that story of being a hybrid professional because you're combining X, Y, and Z, that is your unique value add. That's your value prop of why you're different or more effective in something than other people that have those similar identities.
So the term that popped in my head was diversity from the
Mm.
perspective that I'm a unique individual with diverse interest and diverse skills
Yep.
that I can bring to the table and use all of them. And though the job title might be this, but I also have these and I use all of these. And I think about myself too, right?
Yeah.
Because the journey of an entrepreneur, as you well know, is not a paved road.
No.
No, it's just not. It's bumpy, it's
Bushwhacking.
hilly. Oh my gosh, right? It's actually it's one of those roads you're like, why did I get on this road, right? But yet it's so much
Oh,
fun. And I think about myself a little bit. I mean, I've been podcasting for a year, just a little over a year. April the 1st was a year. So, and I love podcasting. And it has become a core of my
mm,
identity of podcasting.
yep.
But I'm also a coach. And I love coaching and I love helping people move forward in their life and their career. And I do combine podcasting and coaching because a lot of the questions that I ask are coaching related, meaning open ended questions. I do a lot of coaching skills in reframing something that maybe you said, maybe I say it the way I heard it. So my listeners maybe hear it differently. So I'm bridging those two together. But I'm also a consultant, right? And I'm also a speaker. And so I'm kind of bringing all of those together. So right now, and I may at the end of the call may feel differently, but right now I'm putting myself in this hybrid bucket because
Yeah.
I know the feeling that exists when everything is in alignment and you're really, really doing what you love to do. I know how that feels inside. And I think it's so special. And I think if you're doing it, to the listeners, I would say that if you're doing that and you have that feeling, then you're in the right place.
Oh, totally. I do find that when hybrid professionals are in their intersection, they're in that zone of genius. They're in a flow state. And that's why figuring out your hybridity is so hard because you're unconscious that you're in it. You're like, I just do what I do. And you haven't stopped to unpack and realize, wow, in this moment, I'm intertwining my, speaker skills and my coaching skills and my consulting skills with my podcasting, and it's all just happening. That's like a recipe you created. And I wanted to throw out here, we've all listened to a number of different podcasts, but every podcast host is different, right? You listen to some and they're better at interviewing or asking questions, and some resonate and some don't. That's the hybrid magic. Like the way that you said are asking questions is really different. But the fact that you just call yourself a podcaster, that's going back to that bucket of like a job title. It doesn't really mean anything, it's generic. So your hybridity is sort of lost when we just use that one identity of you.
That's so okay. This is great, right? This is great because you got me thinking now. All right. So podcaster, speaker,
Uh-huh.
consultant, coach.
Yeah.
To make them true hybrid,
Yeah.
what would be the term that I would use, or is there a term that I would
Oh,
use?
yeah. This is the magic. So I wrote the book More Than My Title to explain this idea of hybrid professionals, but I also have a workbook because I realized I have a unique process I've been doing with people to take them from looking at their current professional identity, unpacking it, using a Venn diagram, putting them back together, which I call hybridizing, and realizing how do you brand yourself or talk about your hybridity, or in some cases, people create a hybrid title. So my hybrid title is creative disruptor because that's who I am when I work at the intersection of being an artist, educator, researcher, and designer. So in your case, you've got the four circles of the podcaster, consultant, coach, speaker. We would have to do a lot more work. So the taste test of this is I would ask you a lot of questions to get more specific on how you do coaching and how you're doing your podcast, because these little stories and what we're doing, when you start to explain it out loud, there's details and descriptions. So you might be like, well, I navigate, or, I bring things to life. Those right there, I would freeze and be like, well, are you the visionary? Are you the wayfinder? Like, what kind of coach are you? And so suddenly that's where new language comes out about the hybridity. And it takes a little bit of work, but that's how we manifest your
Okay.
hybrid identity.
So is the outline of this in the workbook that you mentioned?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So we will drop the links to
Okay.
the book and the workbook. And I'm gonna do it, and then I'm gonna have you back, and we're gonna
Okay.
dissect me in a coaching session.
Yeah. Or maybe we can do live coaching of it. I don't know.
Yes, we could do it. Yes, we could do it. We'll do it on
We've been
Clubhouse,
doing that
okay?
on Clubhouse. That's part of what
Right.
I do.
Yeah, funny enough, Sarabeth and I met on Clubhouse. And I heard a little bit about her story, and I was like, oh my gosh, you have to come on because this is so fascinating. I bought the book. I do have the book. I haven't read it yet, but I'm excited to read it. I'm going to get the workbook because I do think that this is really fascinating for somebody like me that I didn't realize it, but I've been on a journey. I started my business 4 years ago,
Mm,
and I've been on a journey of reinventing myself
yeah.
and really stepping into not only working for myself and not working for someone else, but also really stepping into what it is I want to do. Because for 30 years I worked for somebody else,
Yeah.
and I want to be clear about this. It's fun. I'm having a great time. Uh, the challenges are real being an entrepreneur, so don't ever underestimate those challenges that are real. But I'm not giving up. I keep moving forward. I keep doing the work, the internal work for me in order to keep moving forward. And I'm going to make pivots. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to learn from them. And we're going to keep pivoting until you get to the place you want to be. And oh, by the way, guys, I'm in my mid 50s. Age is not a limit to when you
No.
could or could not do this. So don't let age or the thought process that I'm too old for this prevent you from taking some of these steps to move
I
forward.
love that. I think
Yeah.
it's a constant reinvention and getting to know ourselves in new ways, at new levels, at new ages.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I want to talk a little bit about branding because
Yeah.
so much of this is about personal brand. And, I will again admit, I don't know that I knew I had a personal brand. And then once I understood it, I understood the power of controlling the personal brand and controlling the message and making sure that you're directing the message and the message is not being directed for you.
Mhm.
But how do you brand yourself today? Kind of your thoughts about
Yeah.
that.
No, I love this. So, when I started on this path to understand myself, I never expected to become an expert in hybrid professional identity. I mean, who does that? What is that? And what I've learned since I've started this work is I'm working between career development, personal branding, and identity research. That's how I'm shaping my thinking and theories. So the personal branding world really connects to hybridity. And they say, if you talk to a personal branding specialist, they would say, your brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room, right? It's how you make them feel and all these kind of verbal, nonverbal cues and your image. And so when you are someone like you and I both are, who quote unquote, we wear a lot of hats, and sometimes we're showing up as the speaker, the author, the podcaster, we know that that's not all of us. And so, in order to be seen the way you want people to see you, you have to figure out how to tell the story of how do all these different hats fit together? Who am I really? what is my truest expertise? Because you're not just a coach, right? Everybody's got that title anymore.
Yeah.
So the trick that I find is when you do this Venn diagram and you really dig into your intersections, you are an expert of your hybridity. Your hybridity is the brand. So when you can define what that hybridity is for you, that's how you can brand yourself. So in my case, when I, connect and work between the artist, educator, researcher, designer identities, I am a creative disruptor. And what that means is that I radically create new innovation strategies to support people and organizations and connect them with ideas. And then I can give examples of how the artist and the educator and so forth perform that. So there's sort of an elevator pitch that I have on my website that walks people through this three-part intro of, start with declaring yourself and then break yourself down into the parts, but then explain the connection between your different parts. And that is defining your brand, essentially. It works really well for people.
So you just went a lot further in explaining brand than I've heard from most people, right?
Okay.
Most people talk about brand being how you make people feel or what
Mhm.
they say about you, as you said earlier, when you're not in the room. It's about the images that you use and the way your Instagram looks and, all that kind of stuff. Right. And
Yeah,
I think those are all components of a personal brand, but you just described it as much more, to me, is much more of an internal thing, right? That then you take and you put externally. But I do believe you have to, whether you want to believe it or not, you have a brand. And we
absolutely.
all have a brand.
We
And
do.
yeah, and how we amplify that brand, I think says a lot about us. But I think it's also important that we need to know what that brand
Yeah.
is,
Yeah, being
right?
able to define and articulate who you are and why you do what you do is the name of the game. And the tools that I've created and tested with people, that's really what my power is, because I find most people sound like a confusing list of things and they literally don't know how to package it or say it succinctly or make sense of who they are.
Sure.
So this work, I mean, you and I've mentioned it a few times already, it starts with a lot of deep self-reflection of who are you? Who are you really? When you do X, I say skills are not identities. Just because you do podcasting and mentoring and coaching and sales, you may not call yourself a mentor or a salesperson.
Mhm.
So we have to actually get to this idea of who you really are to explain why you do what you do.
Wow. So let me ask you, why do you think people are so resistant to do the work,
Which work?
the internal work, right? The
Mhm.
work to answer the questions about who I am and why do you think people are resistant or reluctant to look inside?
It's a great question. I'm sure we could answer this from a few different angles. The one that's coming up for me first, I think, is partially developmental. I looked at a lot of developmental behavioralist psychology when I did my research. And there's a level of consciousness that people evolve into in order to realize, like, even to ask these questions of themselves, like, who am I? And a lot of, in our development, we are who we think, who we're told we are. So if people tell you, hey, Sid, you're a salesperson, you're like, yeah, I accept that. I believe that. That's what my job title says. And you take on the identity that's been given to you. But at some point, other people get to this level where they start to question, is that who I really am? And so I think my first answer is it's a evolution of our consciousness and our
Mhm.
development that's holding some people back.
Yeah, I mean, I experience it a lot in coaching, right? People don't want to do the deep work to, and I tell people all the time, you got to do the work. You're going to
Yeah.
hire me. You want to get something out of this. You got to do the work. And the work means
Yeah.
taking the look inside. But I remember because it was never anything that was put in front of me until I went through my coaching certification, right?
Okay.
And when I went through my coaching certification was when I actually learned what it meant to actually do the work. And
Mm,
it's not easy to do the work.
no.
I mean, self-analyzing yourself is probably like one of the worst things you could do. But once you have that awareness,
Yeah.
right, then it can become life altering moving forward to helping you answer those questions. Because I think you could and should answer the question, who do I want to be almost every day, in
Mm.
almost every minute by the choices that we make, right? Because
Ooh,
so
that's
much of this is
beautiful.
about choices.
Yeah, there's a lot of choice. I'd say there's a lot of autonomy that you have the power to decide and choose who you want to be and how you want to be. And I think people forget that. I literally think people just haven't been told they have the permission. And to your point, I think when people do the work and they get to reflect, it is so empowering because people see themselves in a whole new way. And I watch the light bulb go off and their self-confidence change literally in a moment when they get that aha.
And so this is also about people that maybe I was a salesperson, but once
Mhm.
I understand my hybridity, then now I'm going to move over here and do this job at a company that is different than what I have been doing. And that allows them to be in a place where they're more fulfilled and they're living into what they really want to do, their passions more, right?
Sure.
I'm curious as to how are leaders in the workplace responding to this kind of conversation about embracing the hybrid professional?
Yeah, I'll first start on the individual level before I get to employers, because people usually come to me when they are going through a career transition, they're struggling, they've tried the other tools, they're like, I've updated my resume, I'm searching on LinkedIn, like, I can't figure out what to do next. And it's usually because they haven't looked at who they are and how all their different pieces fit together in their work. So there's that side of like the individual has to figure themselves out. But then on the employer side, I think we are at this, shifting of the guard where the workforce has been stuck on a binary between are you an expert or a generalist? You got to pick one. And if you're somewhere in between, we don't know what to make of you. And so the hybrid is sort of a new revelation that I think employers are starting to sense. But we have to do more education, to be honest. Like it's incumbent on us as job applicants or seekers to help educate employers of like, hey, I'm a hybrid. Let me explain how that connects to the role you want and a value add. And employers have to get more curious about their teams. So I believe every team needs experts and needs generalists and needs hybrids to be high functioning because they all play a special role within, building ideas and breaking down silos and making the work happen. So I see employers being very early in their thinking, some of them unaware of this, some of them newly aware and coming to me to ask questions and get support.
Mhm.
And I think there's just a new appetite saying, wow, we didn't even realize we need to support and manage and train hybrids differently in the workforce. Where do we even start? So we're just at the beginning of this.
Well, I was about to say, if we were to survey the audience, if there was a button or a hand raised thing that they could say, how many of you have heard of a hybrid professional? I would imagine that less than 10% of them would raise their hand because they haven't. And
Yeah.
I had not heard about it until I met you in Clubhouse, right? So,
Mhm.
so we are kind of at the very beginning of all this. How long did it take you? Because obviously, listening to you talk, Sarah Beth, you definitely know your stuff around this. And you wrote a book. How long did it take you to create this framework for hybridity and what it means?
Um, do you know that book Where Good Ideas Come From? It's a favorite of mine because I love innovation work. They talk about the slow hunch and that like even though it looks like an idea might be an aha overnight, it's a series of small little things that accumulate. That's how this happened for me. I went through my own struggles of my professional identity and going through different career identity crises and didn't realize it. And so it probably has been a decade of learning and slowly marinating. And then this was my dissertation. So when I made it a more formal research project, the momentum sped up. But I didn't have the confidence after I finished the dissertation to write a book yet because I didn't know what I was trying to say.
Mhm.
When I finally started putting in the world and testing it, it was within 12 to 18 months that it went from, okay, I'm on to something to I'm writing a book and I'm publishing it and I'm done.
Wow. And when did you publish the book?
The book came out April 2020.
Wow. So it's been out just over a year.
Yeah.
And that's awesome. And it's available at Amazon, anywhere people would buy. But is there audio version?
There's an audiobook. You can
Do
buy it
you
on my
narrate it?
website. I do.
Oh, awesome. I'm gonna have to get the audio version too. So I love it because actually I know this is weird. I like to read and listen at the same time.
Nice.
That allows me to take notes in the margin. I can actually really pay attention. And I
Nice.
really, really enjoy it when the author is actually
I do
reading the
too.
book to you. So
I
that's
think that
pretty
makes a
cool.
difference.
Absolutely get to hear the honestly, I feel like I get to connect with you more. Like when I hear
Yeah.
you, I think it creates a deeper level of connection. So you published it in April 2020. Did you publish it yourself?
I went through an indie publisher, so
Okay.
I worked with someone, yeah.
Okay. We'll have to have another episode too about that because
In the book.
I'm actually working on a book.
Ooh.
And so the podcast listeners haven't heard me say that before, but I'm working on a book. And so I'm excited about it, but I'm like, holy crap, I'm working on a book. What am I doing? So I'm always curious about people that have
Yeah.
written books, like how did you publish and what did you do? So I think that's really interesting. So this is fascinating. And I'm going to go through, and I hope all the listeners will go through as well, buy the book, get the workbook, and do the work. But what words of encouragement would you say to people out there that are struggling in their career, not really happy, looking for something to do? What words of encouragement would you give to them about trying to really understand what it is they want from their life?
Yeah, I mean, this really comes down to intersectionality. And I think people are told too often it's an either or. You have to pick one thing or be an expert of only one thing. I think the power is in the intersections. I'll give just a really quick story of someone that's famous. Maybe people will know. Chip Wilson, right? He's the founder and head of Lululemon Athletic Apparel. Well, before he opened that company, he was in retail, so he knew that sector. He was a snow and sports skateboarding enthusiast, and he understood fabric. And so, at the intersection of those three things is where he saw the opportunity and came up with, well, what if we make athletic apparel that you can wear in the studio and on the street? And hence, athleisure was born. So, the power of interconnecting your different areas of expertise and making your passions combine is where you invent new categories, see opportunities, recognize patterns. I mean, the list really goes on why that's such an exceptional place to tap into. So, I think
So
that's what I want people to take away.
that is a perfect story, right? I didn't know that. And it's a perfect story, but I can tell you, we've spent a lot of money at that store. I can tell you that for sure.
Me too.
I'm telling you, my daughter and son, and well, I even have a couple of things from Lululemon. I mean, everybody knows who that is, but I did not know the story about them. And I think it's a great example of pulling the three things together and creating something great. That is not an old brand. That's a
No.
new brand.
Yeah.
Right. And even during, and this podcast is not about Lululemon, but hey, Lululemon, if you want a sponsorship, reach out. Just kidding. But during the pandemic or during the shutdown, when we would go to the play, to buy things, the shopping mall, shopping mall, the line to get in
Hmm.
was crazy. And you had to have an appointment basically to get in the door. So
Wow.
a new brand, this guy taking and embracing the three things at his intersection. So get the book, get the workbook, discover
Yeah.
what your intersection is, and then go out there and live your best life, right? Go out
Oh,
there
definitely.
and live your best life. Sarabeth, if our audience would like to get in touch with you or connect with you, what is the best way for them to do that?
Um, I would love for them to go to morethanmytitle.com, which is my website with freebies and tools on the book. Connect with me on LinkedIn, Sarabeth Berk, and at More Than My Title is my social handle. I do a lot on Instagram and I'm on Clubhouse.
That's right. Come join us in the party of Clubhouse, guys. I've
Yeah.
talked about Clubhouse a lot, so you guys all know I'm a
Okay.
fan of it. Remember the rules around LinkedIn. If you do reach out to Sarah Beth on LinkedIn, shoot her a note, let her know that you listened to her here on the Trend Report and that you enjoyed the conversation, and that's why you're reaching out. I appreciate you. I'm so glad our paths crossed in Clubhouse. I've learned a tremendous amount today. I'm excited to dive into the book and the workbook. And I hope that the next time I come to Denver, now that travel is opened a little bit, coffee, tea, or beer on me. Okay.
Oh, I love that. Sid, I hope we get to meet in person. I've loved talking with you today, and I'm so glad we met too.
Well, it's been my pleasure. And thanks again for being here. Take care.
Take care.